Well, ED in a young man or younger man is a sign of future cardiovascular disease. So, you know, to get an erection, you've got to have proper, venous tone. You've got to produce the right amount of nitric oxide to get the relaxation so your penis can fill with blood, etc. So, those same mechanisms are involved in all of the vasculature. So, if you have trouble getting in and holding an erection, and you're younger, it puts you at significantly increased risk for cardiovascular disease later in life. And reishi plays a role in prevention of cardiovascular disease, not as a treatment, which is where all of the research is, but as a lifestyle choice. So if you consume reishi on a daily basis over the course of your life, the particularly the triterpenes, but in this case, a lesser extent, the beta glucans, they have a they support the lining of the blood vessels in a way that keeps the linings of the blood vessels healthier um, to resist the stresses and strains. So it might be a little bit technical, but the plumbing of your arterial system um, creates weaknesses in the flow of the blood. So one of the curiosities about the lining of the vascular system, particularly the vein, particularly the arteries, is that the linings require the constant movement of the blood, the agitation. The technical term is shear stress. When a liquid bumps up against a surface and it moves it, that's called shear stress. So this is why cardiovascular exercise is so important, so that you've got the movement of the blood against the lining of your arteries. And if an artery goes around a bend, you get more of that shear stress on the outside, you get less shear stress on the inside. So the inside is where you get atherosclerotic plaques. So the plumbing of our arterial system's got this inbuilt weakness in it, and we need to engage in lifestyle things in terms of reishi every day, green tea every day, cacao every day. These are supplements which deliver um, compounds which can keep and maintain the health of those tissues. Resveratrol plays a role there as well, um, highly bioavailable curcumin. And you need regular exercise to do that. So reishi's key role is getting the triterpenes get taken up by the endothelial cells, and then when the triterpenes are in the endothelial cells, they allow that cell to be more functional under the stress, and to a certain extent repair the dysfunction that gets created by the regular stress. The whole atherosclerosis thing, that's a long discussion, and it has other factors involved, like dental health plays a role. If you don't floss your teeth, then bacteria get into your bloodstream through that connection between your gum and your teeth, and atherosclerotic plaques are breeding grounds, particularly for bacteria, but particularly oral bacteria. So um, mushrooms in general play a role in that process at a secondary level, because they help maintain that immunological environment, so you have less of a biological burden of those bacteria. But it's fascinating how you can go down these rabbit holes, when talking about human health and how each individual supplement kind of fits in. It's fascinating, and that continual aspect of knowledge and learning, and me joining the dots together, creating a bigger picture, is really it keeps me going. And at 65, I'm still fascinated by all this stuff, and there's still plenty to learn.
Yeah, it's as you were like going through that whole process, that was literally what I kept coming to, was how connected the body is, and like one thing affecting another. Primarily, it definitely kind of brings up ideas of my dad, who he's dealt with some heart issues. Uh, part of his heart works harder than the other portion, so
Yeah,
essentially, it's like an imbalanced heart. And I've worked with him quite a lot and just cleaning up his diet. One of the things that you mentioned as well was cacao, and that's a big one that I've added into his kind of daily routine. So like cacao nibs and raw cacao. And it's really cool because he has seen like massive improvements in his heart quality, in his checkups. So it's really cool. It's cool to see like that all kind of tying together. But also like, we started with like ED and then moved into there, and but it's all combined and connected. And even have you heard of like mouth taping at night when you
Yeah.
sleep? And so that so then you breathe through your nose, and supposedly you produce more nitric oxide by breathing through your nose at night, right?
Yeah, it's a much healthier way to breathe. Yeah, it's a very
Yeah,
popular
and
thing now.
then you got the reishi with, it being the longevity mushroom. It's seems like it's just a good combo. So that's actually I've had my dad take reishi, but I think I'm gonna really highlight that it'd be a great one for him to have. But yeah, and then like physical activity. I think that's the one thing that's kind of saved him is he's always had a physical job, like a laborious job, and I think that's really played a big role. But yeah, reishi is reishi your favorite mushroom? So, actually, I didn't ask you this last time. You asked me, but what's your favorite mushroom?
Yeah, well, it depends on what day of the week and what week of the month and a whole lot of things. So, um, I think reishi is the mushroom that I consume the most. So that probably puts it into my favorite. I, there's there's not that many mushrooms that we have access to that are like in that supplement realm. And my advice to people is to consume as many mushrooms in a supplement form as possible. And it's easy to do. There's lots of, products on the market. I'm working with Real Mushrooms. They've got a great thing called Five Defenders, for example, which, has, reishi and turkey tail and shiitake and maitake and lion's mane. So it's a very kind of well balanced. And then you get all of the aspects of all of the mushrooms because mushrooms do lots and lots of things. If you were to ask me a different question, like, what's your favorite thing about mushrooms, that makes them work, then I'd say ergothioneine. A lot of the focus is on beta glucans, but I think the most fascinating, more recent discovery around mushrooms is this thing called ergothioneine. I like to joke that it's the most important nutrient that people don't know about. So everybody thinks they're the kings of antioxidant support and how to deal with oxidative stress in the body, but hardly any of the commentators are, discussing ergothioneine as part of the conversation. And in terms of the human body, it's right up there as one of the most important things that we need. And the major place that we get it from in our diet, because it is a nutrient, is from mushrooms. So just consuming any mushrooms, is important for human health.
Yeah, and I know we touched on ergothioneine and kind of the benefits of it, but run me through again what the massive benefits. I know you mentioned like an antioxidant, but yeah, what are the major benefits of it as well? You said last time that lion's mane has a lot, but is that the one that's the most potent in ergothioneine that we know of?
Now, the one that's best to use in a commercial setting is the yellow oyster. So a mushroom like the bolete, so porcini, Boletus edulis, which is the kind of culinary mushroom of Italy, that's got, quite high levels. But the yellow oyster, there's different varieties of that, and you can have quite vastly different levels. So golden oyster mushrooms are like a kind of ergothioneine factory. So Ergo Plus from Real Mushrooms is made using golden oyster, and you get a minimum of 5 milligrams per capsule. So what is it? It's an antioxidant that the body needs to maintain health. So our body doesn't manufacture vitamin C, for example. We have to get that from our diet. We can't manufacture vitamin D, so we have to, or we can from cholesterol and sunlight, but we don't do that very efficiently. So we have to get some from a supplemental source. So ergothioneine is in that kind of category. It doesn't quite meet the definition of a vitamin. So if you're deficient in ergothioneine, you don't get one specific disease. Like with vitamin C, you get scurvy. If you don't get enough vitamin D, you'll get rickets. So if you don't get enough, if laboratory animals don't get enough ergothioneine, they don't live as long. They and they get more diseases involving oxidative stress. So ergothioneine is an antioxidant that plays a role in just about all of the cells in the body. To give an evolutionary importance to it, because I can say the body needs it, but how do I prove that? You know, the absorptive surfaces in our gut have got transporters that are dedicated for that particular molecule. They move a few other things, but ergothioneine is the primary thing. They bring that in from the gut, and our digestion is almost 100% complete on the ability to bring that molecule into our body. And then all of the cells in our body have got these same transporters to take that molecule in. And then the biology of it, because antioxidants, you know, it's a difficult kind of complex topic to talk about. But every cell has got the ability to produce energy and respiration. So the waste production of those cells, like the exhaust out of your petrol-driven car, that waste is toxic. It also signals, you know, certain cellular processes, so it has some positive roles as well. But it needs to be dealt with, because if that waste builds up, then the cells can't function. And that waste is acidic in nature. So if you don't deal with your stress at that cellular level properly, cells become more acidic, and then proteins don't work properly, and you get stress. And you know, the most obvious sign of that is like when your muscles cramp up at the fatigue point in exercise. The pH gets so high in your muscle cells that they just kind of stop working. So ergothioneine plays a role in managing that pH change. So it's a backup defense supporting glutathione to ensure that all of the cells in the body are always in optimal kind of conditions. And if you have low levels of ergothioneine, then all sorts of diseases of oxidative stress start to manifest. So if you have low ergothioneine across your lifespan, you'll have more cardiovascular disease, as we were just discussing. You'll have more neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, mild cognitive impairment. As an older person, you won't sleep as well. You're more likely to get macular degeneration. If you're a woman, you're more likely to have preeclampsia. If you're a woman, you're more likely to have, you know, a birth which might be below weight or overweight. There's all of these very highly specific things that we can talk about in terms of ergothioneine, but we need only about 4 or 5 milligrams a day to give what the body needs, and the average American's only getting about 1.1 milligrams a day based on the epidemiology that's been done. So every American has got a nutritional deficiency of this key molecule, which helps to play into the disease burden that we see in the population as people get older.
And so why is it so hard to get it in for Americans? Like, why is it just we're just not eating foods that contain it? Like, for example, if we did have more, what was it, porcini that you mentioned, or like the
Yeah.
yellow oyster mushrooms? Like, if we were eating that on a more regular basis, would it be a very obtainable amount to hit in a day?
That's the best answer. And the reason for the low levels is that the average American's not eating enough mushrooms. And it doesn't matter what sort of mushroom it is. And most of the epidemiology is done on mushrooms that are commonly eaten as foods. So that's like agaricus mushroom. So porcini, not porcini, portobello, button, crimini, or from an Asian perspective, you know, where a lot of this epidemiology is done, shiitake, oyster, wood ear mushrooms, enoki. So those mushrooms, you only need to eat them, you know, like a few times a week to get the benefits in these cognitive trials, for example. So the other place that ergo comes from is the soil fungi and certain bacteria in the soil. So plants will take it up. So people get some ergothioneine from plants, but it's 1 to 2 orders of magnitude less. So it's 10 to 100 times less from a plant than it is from a mushroom. So the problem with plant-sourced ergothioneine is that modern agricultural practices, which rely on heavy tilling and lots of fertilizer, disrupt the fungal environment in the soil, and there's not as much fungi, so the plants don't get as much ergothioneine, when plants are grown in that intense agricultural way. So the other problem is that we don't know the answer to this, that as people age, they tend to reduce their plasma levels of ergothioneine. So even though you might be taking it, your body might not be as efficient at taking it up, or there might be a much greater need for it, so it gets consumed. So as we age, it puts a greater emphasis on supplementing it. But to put like a full stop on the comment, um, we need to redesign the food pyramid so that vegetables and mushrooms get separated, because currently they're together. So we need mushrooms as their own category, and the dietary advice needs to be eat as many mushrooms as you can a week, at least twice a week. And if you want to be really healthy, you could replace a meat dish once or twice a week with the same amount of mushrooms to prevent that. Or take a mushroom supplement every day, like Real Mushrooms Ergo Plus. Just one capsule a day, Monday to Friday, and you're done and dusted.
Yeah. It's coming back to the eating of mushrooms and like consuming them as like a culinary experience, I guess. I will say oyster mushrooms is probably the closest meat alternative that I've ever had personally. I mean, I do eat meat, but when I was down in Cusco, in Peru, there was a little cafe and I got like a mixed bowl with quinoa and other things, but it had oyster mushroom. And I have no idea what kind of seasoning they put on it, but I swear it was the best mushroom, like, meat alternative that I could have ever experienced, and alls it was literally oyster mushroom. The way they cooked it and seasoned it was perfect, but, does that have something to do with the f like, because I've heard that we share more DNA with mushrooms than mushrooms share with plants. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Does that
And
have a does that play a role in
it does
the
it.
texture of the mushroom?
Um, no, but it plays a role in the overall context of what we're talking about. Oyster mushrooms, I think, are very, very underrated as a medicinal food. So they're very high in the ergothioneine that we just talked about. But there's a lot of clinical trials particularly in children, where if you give children oyster mushroom extracts on a regular basis, they get significantly less winter infections. They're not as severe. They don't last as long. They have less complications, and they're more vital, when they finish that infection. So the immunological benefits of oyster mushrooms are a bit underrated. But that evolutionary connection that you mentioned, if you go back in time, I don't know the exact point, but it doesn't really matter that much. Let's just say 1,000 million years, so like a billion years ago. Um, Animals and fungi had a common ancestor. So we split off. If you went further back in time, you'd get to where plants split off from their common ancestor, which was, our fungal animal common ancestor. So when animals and fungi broke off, a lot of the cellular machinery um, was retained, and some of it identically, and some of it analogously. So depending on which scientific paper you look at, it's about 30% of the DNA that a human shares with a fungus. And you can, in a fungus, it uses ergothioneine as its primary antioxidant inside the cells, and glutathione is the secondary antioxidant. And there's a unique one in a fungus called mycothiol. But in humans, the main intracellular water-soluble antioxidant is glutathione, and the backup antioxidant is ergothioneine. So they're the same two molecules, but when you come into the animal, they get flipped around in terms of how they work. So there's a direct one-to-one relationship between how fungus or fungal organisms and animals, humans, all vertebrates, control their intracellular stress. Another clear correlation is cholesterol. So we need cholesterol molecules in our cell membranes to make them pliable and conduct the right, signals, etc. So in humans, we have cholesterol. In a fungus, we have ergosterol or ergosterol, and they have almost identical shapes. And if you expose ergosterol to sunlight, you get vitamin D2. And if you expose
I was just gonna
cholesterol to
ask.
sunlight, you get vitamin D3. And then from there, it becomes a lot more kind of scientific and nerdy, but there's lots of intracellular stuff that we share in terms of how the cells work, cytoskeletal arrangements and particular enzymes and protein pathways. So it really is fascinating that we've got this close history, and because we've got that shared history and we happen together, and these early events happened in the primordial ocean. So a fungus was always trying to attack an animal because we all need food to survive. So fungi, like animals, they breathe oxygen, and they need to digest their food. But a fungus doesn't have a stomach, so it secretes its digestive juices on the outside and then sucks in the nutrients that have been digested in through its cell wall. So um, our our warm-blooded nature is relatively recent kind of invention biologically, and a fungus has a lot of trouble attacking an animal. We've got all of these elaborate defenses that have developed over 400 or 500 million years. The earliest defense proteins that are observed in sea sponges are like 400 million years old. So the human body has got incredible vigilance for the presence of a pathogenic fungi. So that's why we don't get many fungal diseases. We get tinea, we get athlete's foot, we get jock itch, we get ringworm, but getting serious fungal diseases only happens in people that are immunocompromised or they're on drugs that are suppressing their immune system. So um, part of that approach that our body has is that it's very vigilant to the recognition of the beta glucan signatures that fungal organisms have, and that kind of sets the alarm bells ringing. So when we consume a medicinal or a functional mushroom, it doesn't have any pathogenic properties. It's not not like that TV show where the cordyceps started infecting humans. That can't happen. But these molecules still ring the alarm bells, but they ring the alarm bells in a way of the immune system to tell the immune system, hey, I'm not pathogenic, but I could be. You need to be more vigilant about surveying your environment. You need to be more capable of responding to infections. You need to be better at communicating very specific messages that deal with very specific threats. And you need to be able to control the whole process without getting too crazy, without having, a burden of too much inflammation, which might take you down, kind of like an autoimmune disease. So medicinal mushrooms deliver these really educated messages that keep the immune system and all of the cells in our body that can communicate with the immune system in a healthy, balanced way so that we can be free of disease as we live our lives. And part of the problem, I think, with the modern human is that we haven't understood this very well. Science has been really slow to investigate this. Mycophobia exists as a real thing with our diet, but it also exists in scientists' minds. So a lot of fungal discoveries have been delayed because people just haven't even thought about a fungus, or they haven't investigated it because of the inherent bias that they've got. And we can talk about it later if you want to, but that plays into paleological and evolutionary diets. The consumption of meat that we attribute to early humans is based on isotopes of carbon and nitrogen that are measured in ancient skeletons by looking at the collagen. Well, when you eat a mushroom, it delivers the same isotopes of carbon and nitrogen. So all of the research that says humans ate this much protein has never taken into account the fact that early humans were avid consumers of mushrooms. So the amount of mushrooms that we consume in our diet has been overlooked totally, because there's kind of scant evidence and there's been no interest in doing it. So the whole evolutionary thing is really fascinating, and I've coined this term called the gourmet ape theory to describe the fact that, Terence McKenna was the proponent of the stoned ape theory, that psychedelics played a big part in the development of the human brain. But I think mushrooms in general, as a food, and particularly the ergothioneine, have played a really important role for a much longer period of time in the development, of the modern human. It's a really fascinating topic.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty much just here like in a lecture because I'm taking notes. It's
Yeah.
like
Sorry about that.
all
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
no, don't apologize. Like I enjoy this and it's super fascinating to me. I agree with the gourmet theory here, and the gourmet ape, right? Because yeah, I do think obviously we've been consuming mushrooms for a long time, and who knows what role that's played, and going back and looking at, like you said, looking at the isotopes and checking these out, like obviously more research needs to be done for us to have a strong understanding on that. But I really want to go into these medicinal mushrooms and we're going to dive deep. But I have to take us back just a little bit because there's a question I've always wondered, and you kind of mention it. But so it is true that if you take mushrooms and put them out in sunlight for 30 minutes or so before cooking them, it's a good idea to increase it'll increase the vitamin D levels of the mushrooms.
It will. Yeah. So, um, it depends on the latitude in the world where you are. It depends on the time of the year. So, summer, the more vertical the sun is, the more particular UV rays you get to do that job. So, if you're going to do that, gills up is the best way because there's lots of ergosterol in the gills. There's less like on the outer surface. Um, if you want to go to the trouble of cutting them up, that's even better because you increase the surface area. It works with fresh and dried mushrooms as well. So if you put a powder out, you'll get that conversion as well. However, I would consider myself a mycophile, and I started doing that, and it gets old really quickly. You do it maybe half a dozen times, and you're like, oh, damn, I'm just going to go and buy, a ready-made one. And Real Mushrooms has got a vitamin D2 product where the mushrooms are irradiated with UV light to optimize the vitamin D2, and you can get a guaranteed dose. But if you are the more OCD type and you can create a habit around doing something like that, then yeah, you should go for it. It's a legitimate thing to do.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was curious on it. I think I will fall into the same category as you where I sometimes like forget to take, I don't know, chicken or whatever out of the freezer. It's like, oh my God. So cutting up mushrooms and putting them in the sunlight is probably just going to be another barrier there. But in terms of real mushrooms, which obviously we've kind of just skimmed over it, and I want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit more about real mushrooms because they're amazing. I love what y'all are about. But one of the things that you were mentioning that real mushrooms does is this dual extraction, which is super important. But also actually extracting from both the fruiting body and the mycelium. So for a while, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, uh, I kind of got to a point where I wasn't super, I don't know. I didn't really care to take mycelium. I was more so just focused on the fruiting body because you could know that, hey, this is fruiting body. It is like pure mushroom that we're, either consuming or having the extract of. Whereas the mycelium, typically grown on rice or, who knows what the medium is. But then it's very difficult to know what the quantity is of that you're
Yeah.
receiving in there. So for a while, I was really big on pretty much just going with fruiting body. And if I did get some mycelium, it was here or there. I believe there is some huge benefit in the mycelium, but how do we get around this issue of the medium kind of taking up a majority of quote unquote mycelium when we're taking like a supplement?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's quite a vexing question. As a as a practicing medical herbalist, And someone, you know, I put myself in the position as, you know, like a mentor and an educator, and as well as promoting, you know, good health, I'm also cognizant of making sure that I honor the traditions that I come from. So when you step out of that clinical realm where, you know, the focus is on doing whatever's the right thing by the patient, when you come into the retail world, kind of it's a bit like guerrilla tactics, like the gloves are off. People can say anything they like. People can make anything they like. They don't feel any compunction to honor any tradition or validate, you know, the science around any unique discoveries that they might think that they've made. So it's created a lot of confusion in the marketplace. So I think one of the really impressive things about real mushrooms is that they honor the tradition from which functional mushrooms come from, and the products that they produce are a reflection of those kind of ancient kind of practices and the traditional knowledge that's come through time. And the products are all focused on fruiting bodies. Mushrooms is kind of like the generic term that we use because that's where all of the tradition is. So if we want to think about mycelium, mycelium is the main body of the fungal organism. It's what seeks out food. Its focus is on survival throughout not just its lifespan, but creating the environment so that its offspring can, you know, perpetuate into the future. So the the mycelium is like the main body of the organism, and it's got a particular genetic makeup that's around seeking out food, defending itself against predators, defending itself against stressful environments, and surviving through time. And then when the conditions are right, that organism will say, okay, it's now's the right time to reproduce. So it will produce a reproductive structure. And depending on the type of fungus, you know, there's different forms. So we use the word mushroom, but um, a cordyceps reproductive structure has got different morphology and characteristics to a shiitake mushroom, which is different to chaga, which is different to reishi. So there's kind of nuances. But so when the timing is right, a reproductive structure will get produced. And the purpose of that reproductive structure is to make spores, which will then unite, grow a little version of a hyphae, and then they'll unite with another organism's spore, and then you'll get like a sexual reproduction, and then you can get a continuation of the species. So the purpose of the reproductive structure is to do that, but it's also to ensure the dispersal of those spores. So a lot of different mushrooms have got different dispersal techniques, and then those mushrooms need to defend themselves against animal grazing, insect attack, bacterial infiltration, et cetera, et cetera. So the chemistry of that reproductive structure is significantly different to the chemistry of the mycelium. They're completely different parts. So if I said to you, Evan, you know, close your eyes, I've got the best apple you've ever tasted in the world. This is going to just blow your hair back. And put your hand out, and I'll put it in your hand, and then I'll ask you to open your eyes, and in your hand is an apple leaf. And you'll be like, what the hell, Lee? Like, you don't eat apple leaves, you eat apple fruit. And that's the distinction that you have between, just using that silly example. If you wanted the perfect example, the apple is the reproductive structure or the mushroom, and the entire rest of the tree is the fungal organism. So you can't compare them. So scientists back in the 60s and 70s discovered that the beta glucans from some of these mushrooms, if you could purify them and treat them in a particular way, you could get these really powerful medicines. And they needed vast amounts of beta glucan to do that. And the easiest and most cost-effective way to do it was to grow the mycelium in a liquid tank, and it would never produce a reproductive structure. And then when you finished your production, you'd drain the tank, you'd get the mycelium, and then you would extract that mycelium to get access to the beta glucans. So these very highly specific drugs were made and they're what's used to treat cancers and all sorts of diseases. And in countries like China and Japan and Korea and Taiwan, they've got kind of legitimate drug status. So when you grow mycelium like that, it doesn't have the same nutrients, so it can't make the same molecule. So reishi fruiting bodies are very high in the bitter triterpenes, but reishi mycelium grown in a tank doesn't have any triterpenes because it doesn't have the raw materials to make them, because they come from the wood from the tree. So if you wind forward then, some bright spark at some point said, we grow mycelium on grain as the starting point for the reproductive structure production. So we grow mushrooms by creating grain spawn and then using that to inoculate the medium to get the mushrooms. So some bright spark said, let's grow mycelium on brown rice or sorghum or oats, and then we won't let those substrates produce fruiting bodies. They might have little primordial mushrooms, but and then we'll grind that up and sell it as if it's a mushroom. And that's a really dominant part of the market. But those products may have clinical value. It's still early days in the research. But if any value is derived from those products, it doesn't come from the fungal part. And if you just give me a couple of more minutes to just tease that out a little bit, when you inoculate brown rice with mycelium, and the conversion of the brown rice to mycelium is never 100%. If you've ever had tempeh, you can still see the soybeans like in the tempeh. They don't all get converted. I went and looked at some patents, and some of the mycelium on grain producers have got patents around these products, and they recommend, or they suggest, around 35% conversion. So if you had a kilogram of brown rice that was wet and then you inoculated it with, say, turkey tail, at the end of the manufacturing process, you'd have 650 grams of brown rice, because 35% of it would be converted to mycelium. Mycelium's 90% water. Brown rice is 50% water. So if you dried that, and we're taping this so people can go back and listen to it again if the maths is a bit much. So when you dry that, you've got 325 grams of brown rice, because half of 650 is 325, and 10% of 350 is 35 grams of dried mycelium. So when you add those weights together and then you do the calculation, the dried mycelium is only about 9.7, say 10% of that total weight. So when you analyze those products, they don't have beta-glucans in them, only very, very small amounts. They don't have ergothioneine in them at detectable levels. They have very low levels of any of the secondary metabolites, in some cases no secondary metabolites. So they're not a fungal product, and 2 capsules, which delivers 1,000 milligrams, only contains 100 milligrams of mycelium. Those products typically aren't extracted, so you need to boil the mycelium to get access to any of the beta-glucan. So that might be one of the reasons why the beta-glucan numbers are like very, very low, non-therapeutic levels. So by marketing those products as if they're a mushroom, clearly they're not a mushroom. They have no relationship to a mushroom. They're a fungal fermented food, so they should be classified as a fermented kind of food. If they have any benefits at all, and some of the research suggests they might be, it's to do with what the fungus is doing to the brown rice. It's fermenting. It's not the exactly correct term, but it's close enough. So that there might be unique molecules being created there, which might describe the benefits. But from my point of view, and because I'm so old, I'm 65 next month, I've seen lots of trends ruin product categories when they're done well. So my fear is that those products don't work like a mushroom, and people will take them expecting the mushroom benefits because that's how they're promoted and marketed. But people will do it for long enough, but they won't get the benefits, and then they'll say the whole mushroom category is no good, and they'll give up on mushrooms. So, and those products, they're kind of, their history is with switch and bait marketing. They've tricked people into thinking that they've been getting a mushroom when they're really just getting a bit of, myceliated grain. It's a bit scandalous, really. So you can tell I'm a bit passionate about this. It kind of makes my blood boil a little bit that there's this confusion and you have to go to such elaborate lengths to explain it. And in a podcast like yours, it's great that you allow me to just talk, because with a sound bite, with like a 15-second snippet, you can never convey the complexity that's needed to convince someone that, there are these differences that exist and they really are important. And you need to take them into account if you're wanting to get the best out of your supplement. That's a bit of a
Yeah.
rant, hey, but I see you kind of
Good
nodding
rant.
as I'm going along.
I find this super fascinating, and it's something I've like always wondered about, especially because I enjoy medicinal mushrooms, and I believe that there's a ton of benefit from them, especially for me. I mean, of course, having scientific backing is huge, and I think it's the route to go. Like, we want to back our stuff in science, but I think also that until the science catches up, it's also really important to look at just the history it's had in being used in certain cultures, and the like we said, like Shaga, the king of the mushrooms, and Reishi, the queen, like the longevity mushroom, and
Yeah.
they've used these for so many years, and so I like to look at that and see the benefits there, and then try it out for myself and see what works. But um, I kind of just want to really quickly come back to this point, which thank you for diving so deep onto it, because I love that. But so would you say then the best method of consuming like medicinal mushrooms in a supplement, would that be specifically the fruiting body, and then not really having the mycelium in there, or a mixture of the two as well? Do we want that dual extraction of alcohol and boiled, like water extraction? Yeah, what's like the top level that we could get here?
For the average, consumer, it's the mushroom or the fruiting body, which should occupy, the main focus of the consumption. And the reason for that is, and you eloquently described, the term evidence-based medicine. So when we say evidence-based medicine, everybody thinks, oh, there's got to be a research study to back it up, but that isn't the correct definition of evidence-based medicine. Evidence-based medicine relies on tradition. So you're guided by what your peers did in the past. And then you're guided by your clinical practice, so that you're playing it out in real time. Does it work? Doesn't it work? Under what conditions, is it optimal or not optimal? And then when the research is being done, you're being guided by the research, which guides the future direction of that tradition. And then you embody that research. If we wait, you can do a little bit of research. It takes 15 years for it to get into the conventional medical system. So there's got to be this active kind of interaction between the practice of it and the research of it. So that's why, people like me are important. I'm not just a commentator or like a company, kind of representative. I'm a practicing, healthcare professional. So I do both. So the fruiting body is where all of the tradition is, and the fruiting bodies give the complexity that allows us to access the traditional knowledge, so that we don't need to rely always on a clinical trial, because we won't have the clinical trials because they haven't all been done. So if you want to get the male health benefits from cordyceps, we don't have a clinical trial for that. So if you're purely going on the evidence, you would never use cordyceps. But all of the animal studies are really quite profound about how cordyceps can protect, testicular tissue. They can protect the testosterone and the sperm quality against external stressors. And we've got the tradition around cordyceps being used as an aphrodisiac, which is kind of like the old-fashioned terminology around, the modern understanding of testosterone, etc. So the only way we can tap into that traditional knowledge is by use what they use traditionally, and that's the fruiting body. There are cases where if you've got a pure mycelium product, which is produced as a liquid culture, and you've got and these products are all focused on the beta glucans, and that's a different kind of, it's a subcategory of the whole mushroom. So if you've got reishi beta glucans from mycelium, um, it doesn't have any triterpenes, doesn't have any ergothioneine, doesn't have any ergosterol. So you're getting a very specific application, and that really needs then to be guided by the science. So there needs to be clinical trials to say, yeah, if you take this product, it's going to do this, and it'll be particularly relevant to your immune system. Or if you have some other nefarious thing going on, like it might be beneficial, but that has to be guided by the research, because that wasn't how it was done traditionally. And then, the mycelium on grain shouldn't be seen as mycelium, shouldn't be seen as a mushroom or a fungal product. It should be seen as a fungally fermented food, and it's a totally different category, and that needs to be driven by its own evidence. But currently, that MOG for short, mycelium on grain or myceliated grain, they piggyback off all of the traditional knowledge which comes from the mushroom or the fruiting body, and the chemistry of the two is totally different. As I've described, the nature of the products are totally different. So it's fraudulent to use that traditional knowledge to back up the use of a supplement, which is totally different. So for the most part, it's the fruiting body, and then under quite specific conditions, the properly manufactured submerged culture beta glucans. But the way the labeling laws are in the US, it can be quite challenging for the consumer to actually arrive at that information. And not all the companies are very forthcoming at divulging that.
Yeah, that tends to be
Yeah.
kind of an issue
Does
in
that help clarify it for you?
Yes, yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I think I was kind of on to the right path with really kind of just focusing on the fruiting body primarily. And yeah, so I'm gonna continue sticking with the fruiting body and moving in that direction. And then I also wanted to highlight a point that you brought up last time, which I thought was really important to make here, and that's about kind of the stigma as well around like mushrooms being grown in China and produced, and then consuming those, and kind of all the questions around it. Is it being done properly? This and that. And I know you were mentioning that mushrooms and pretty much the practice of medicinal mushrooms and use of them originated in China. That is where it started. And really, by finding a good provider, you're literally helping to promote the preservation of that practice and that stewardship of these medicinal mushrooms. So, yeah, like just guide our listeners through
Yeah,
why
well,
it's okay to consume that.
yeah, you kind of summed it up. I think, when you mention China in a conversation, particularly in relation to a dietary supplement, whether it's a nutrient or a herb or a mushroom, the red flags get raised, and rightly so, because there's a lot of unethical practices. But China's not unique in those unethical practices. I mean, they happen here in Australia, they happen there where you are in the US. I mean, there isn't any country that's immune from unethical behavior. Seems to be a human problem, worldwide. So you're right. The China is for many of these mushrooms, it's their ancestral homeland. It's where they've been used as medicines, and in some cases, the people that grow them have been doing it, as their livelihood, multi-generationally, and the avid consumption of mushrooms now has created the economics where those people who lived quite poor lives now have the opportunity to prosper as a result of the big demand that's being created. So when you grow mushrooms in the wilds of China, like China's a massive place, it's not polluted across its entirety. So, if you're growing herbs by the highway, they're going to be covered in cadmium from the brake linings, and all of that sort of rubbish. And that happens in India as well. So you have to be careful with your sourcing, but it's not just uniquely about mushrooms. It happens with herbs as well. So when you grow mushrooms, in those pristine environments under organic conditions, and I would never buy a product from China unless it was organic, and certified by a proper certifying body. So all of Real Mushrooms products are organic, and there's the ability to interact with the grower. And I've had a long history in herbal medicine, a long history in practitioner-focused herbal medicine, where the growing relationships have existed across the whole world. Companies might say they grow all of their herbs in America, or companies might say they grow all of their herbs in Australia. It's not possible because, to some extent, certain herbs need certain climatic conditions, and they only grow in certain ecological niches. So you really get forced to go wherever you need to go in the world to get the very best quality. And qualities to do with the phytochemistry of the product, and then this issue of purity and consistency, are kind of secondary measures. So Real Mushrooms is very focused on the chemistry of the mushroom, delivering the best that we know that mushroom can offer. So if you harvest turkey tail from the wild, for example, that's a hard thing to do because, it's a pretty prolific mushroom, but, to satisfy the US market, you need a lot of it. So, there's it's a backbreaking sort of exercise, but that's where it started. And it was observed that the variation that exists in the wild populations of turkey tail make it impossible to have a consistent profile of chemistry. And another thing that gets talked about as being a negative of this idea of standardization. So standardization technically means that the product that you make is going to be the same all the time. And if you describe a particular quality around something, you're always going to meet that quality. Using a herbal example, standardization might be standardizing for a particular molecule, and then the manufacturer can get a really high quality herb, so they don't need to use as much to get that molecule, or an unethical manufacturer could get a really cheap herb which has hardly any of that substance in it, but they can buy a lot of it really cheaply, so they can extract it and concentrate it and just say, hey, we've got the same amount of that molecule as that other company, but you miss all of the complex chemistry that you've got. So there are some weaknesses in standardization that people can kind of wiggle around. But from a Real Mushrooms point of view, working very closely with growers to develop strains of mushroom which deliver consistent high efficacy means that you can give the very best, product. So with turkey tail, that variety made it impossible to have a consistent product. So a certain amount of research was done to say these varieties give the right profiles of beta-glucans and triterpenes, etc., and some of the other molecules that are there. And then that strain can be bred so that, the whole production has got similar genetics. So then the products that you make are going to be, very similar. But I think it's a shame that, that China gets used as a wedge. You can grow a good mushroom anywhere in the world. If the conditions are right, if you've got the right substrate. So if you want to grow reishi, you need wood. You can't grow it on brown rice because you need wood, because you need the lignin, which provides the phenolics that can then make the triterpene. So you have to have a faith and an understanding in the tradition so that you grow on the appropriate medium. Chaga can only come from live trees, for example. It can't come from dead trees. So you can grow a good mushroom anywhere in the world, but it comes down to scale and economics, and companies thrive because they make profits, and you can't shy away from that. So over the course of the lifespan of a company, the locations and the manufacturing processes and all of the things that you do to make the company successful, are all kind of, balanced around that. So the Real Mushrooms focus on China ticks all the boxes. You can honor the tradition. You can get the economics right, and you can consistently deliver the high volume that's necessary to support the voracious appetite at the moment, across the whole mushroom space. Because it's not just about supplements, it's the supplements are going into foods and beverages, and the demand is just huge. And keeping faith with the quality when the production numbers start to skyrocket, when you're talking about thousands of kilograms, tons of this stuff, it becomes really quite challenging.
Yeah, and I think that it's exactly what you said. This is where third-party testings and certifications, like certified organic or whatever the certification may be, that's why it's important, like regardless of where you're growing your or getting your
Yeah.
ingredients from, which, like you said, we want to get it from the place where it's specialized and grows the best in that area. But yeah, you could third party test to make sure that you're getting what is being said is in that product. And yeah, it's a good way to go about it, I think.
Yeah, and those test results are available, on the Real Mushrooms website for the products.
I
So
love that.
you want to know the beta glucan levels. If it's reishi, you want to know the triterpene levels, and then you want to know that it's free of heavy metals and it's free of pesticides and aflatoxins and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I know we're we're getting close to an hour here, which is wild. The time for me has
That
flown. But
flies, doesn't it? Yeah.
yeah, one of my old teachers used to say, time's fun when you're having flies. But, anyways, yeah, that's my bad dad joke here, I guess. But anyways, I wanted to ask you a couple last questions here. First off, as I mentioned last time with you, one of my like North Stars has basically been gut health, because it's obviously something
Yeah.
I've been dealing with as a kid, and then really navigating my way and optimizing it. So what would be the best mushroom for gut health if we were going to focus on that?
Well, any mushroom will be good for gut health. So all of the mushrooms have got beta glucans. If you're consuming whole mushrooms, so if you're eating them in your diet, or if you're using the real mushrooms one-to-one extract powders or capsules, then you're getting the insoluble beta glucans and chitin, as well as the soluble beta glucans. And those molecules act as prebiotics, so they're food for the beneficial bacteria. So that helps to maintain a healthy bowel flora. And a healthy bowel flora is kind of like ground zero when you're thinking about healthy gut. Even the humble button mushroom has got soluble beta glucans in it that when you eat enough of them, they have anti-inflammatory effects in the gut. So the soluble beta glucans block particular inflammatory receptors and down-regulate inflammation, particularly in people that have got a tendency towards inflammatory bowel diseases. So the bowel flora is kind of like primary, and all the mushrooms will do that. So the more mushrooms we eat, the healthier bowel flora we get. And then a healthier bowel flora means that we're then going to have less inflammation, we'll have less leaky gut, etc. But then the action of the beta glucans on the immune tissue, so you beta glucans, the immune cells have got projections that come through the lining of the gut, so they're kind of sampling that environment. So beta glucans acting at those receptors help to calm the immune system down and help to educate it. So that immune layer, which is just underneath the epithelial layer, becomes a bit more happy and harmonious and less inflammatory. So mushrooms play a very important role as a foundation in maintaining an optimal gut environment. But if I was to just pick, say, two mushrooms, lion's mane has got, the consciousness of cognitive function around it. Like the mass kind of thinking is like, it's the great mushroom for cognition. And it is. I'm not disagreeing with that. But traditionally, one of its primary uses was for gastrointestinal health, particularly chronic things in the gut that would have been linked to chronic inflammation, chronic inflammatory bowel diseases. And lion's mane was used in quite high doses as a food, so anywhere north of 5 grams. So if you sat down and had like a whole head of lion's mane, you might get like 100 grams, 3 or 4 ounces, which might translate into like 10 or 15 grams of dried mushroom. So that's number one in terms of gut health. And then Tramella on a regular basis is also really significant for gut health as well. It's got a different type of polysaccharide arrangement. The beta glucans are in a slightly different configuration, so you get good synergy between the lion's mane and the Tramella. So they work kind of really well together. And real mushrooms has got both of those. And Tramella is a little bit mucilaginous. So if you put half a teaspoon into a hot drink and stirred it up, then it makes it a little bit thicker. So you get a bit more mouthfeel in the drink.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I already love lion's mane. I think I told you last time that is my favorite
Yeah.
medicinal mushroom. It also tastes good, so it is nice to eat. I didn't know that about Tramella, and I'm sure you could actually put that into. I know there's like hot cocoa mixes and stuff that they do with like mushrooms, but maybe that would
Yeah.
help to give it that thicker.
Yeah, it does. And then when you get near the bottom, you just need a spoon to stir it because some of that stuff settles out. So the last few mouthfuls will always be just that little bit thicker. But I add Tramella and lion's mane to all of the foods that I cook. So if I'm frying just button mushrooms, I'll add some lion's mane powder on there just to kind of up the therapeutic ante. You can do the same with Tramella. I add lion's mane and Tramella to soups and casseroles. You can add them any baking that you do that can be added to any of those things. They're both very versatile, bland, neutral flavors, which are very compatible with just about any sort of taste. I've made some great stews with Tramella, like things that you might put on the slow cooker, like chicken with a bunch of fresh mushrooms and vegetables and a few spoons of Tramella. You get a much thicker, syrupy kind of soup as a result of that. It's delicious.
That's awesome. Okay, I definitely have to give that a try.
I need
Last
to make a
question here
recipe
for you,
book.
Lee. Yeah, I know. You need to come out with the mushroom recipe book. No, and actually cooking with mushrooms is something I've been wanting to incorporate more. They tend to be a little on the pricier side when you get into, some of these finer mushrooms, I would
They
say,
do,
but
yeah, yeah.
they're really tasty and obviously they have a lot of benefit. But last question I do have here for you, Lee, was what is if you had to like get rid of every mushroom, you could only have one for the rest of your life, and that was the one you had to stick with, which one would you choose?
Oh, can I ask some qualifying questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, am I on a desert island and all I've got's the fish I catch and the coconuts off the trees, or am I living in my current environment and I've just got one mushroom?
Mm. Okay, well, you know what? I'll give you the option to go with both routes. You can choose two different dimensions here and pick
Well,
two mushrooms on that.
in the modern world, I'd go with reishi because reishi has got things in it that no other mushroom has. It's not called the mushroom of immortality for nothing. And I'd take it. I've been doing it every day since early 2020. It's turning my white hair. I used to have just pure white hair, but it's Reishi's turning it black again. I've got like about 15% black hairs now as a result of doing the Reishi. So there's there's lots of things that Reishi does in terms of resolving all sorts of processes to do with aging in the body, which is why it's called the mushroom of immortality. You don't really live forever. You have a healthier life. You have a longer health span, is what I'm trying to say. So I don't want to live to an advanced age. I mean, 90 or 95 would be nice, but I want to be really active and healthy through that entire span. I don't want to spend the last 20 years in a wheelchair or in a hospital bed, like in a vegetative state. I want to be optimized so that I live life to the fullest. So I think reishi kind of fits that bill. And I think, for most people, that would be my recommendation as well. But in the real world, we can't just have one. But, that would be the one that I would get people focused on. And Real Mushrooms has got the best reishi, I think, on the market without me doing any kind of marketing spin. I've looked at all the products. It's got the highest beta glucans. It's got the highest triterpenes. And if people want to, if I've piqued their interest on a Real Mushrooms brand, if you use my name, Lee, Lee, as the coupon code, you can get an additional 20% off your first purchase, or if you're a regular purchaser, you get 20% off your next purchase. So go and buy a bunch of either one of those. But if you're looking for somewhere to start, maybe Reishi.
Yeah, I think Reishi is like one of the best ones to go with, and also truly thank you for providing that code as well, because I like to get our listeners a little something here on the show, just as like a thank you for tuning in. But yeah, I really appreciate that, Lee.
Yeah,
It's
my
really
pleasure.
helpful for it's helpful for all the listeners, and as well too, Lee. I want to give you the floor here to just also mention where people can find you, anything else going on at Real Mushrooms that people should know about, and then also just any last parting words with the listeners, any 65 years of sage advice that you can give is more than welcome.
Yeah, I think I'd like to say that Real Mushrooms is not just about humans. Uh, mushrooms play a really important role in pet health as well. So Real Mushrooms has got a really good veterinary line. So there's some great products there. So it's not just about it's about looking after your animals as well. And if you want to connect with me, you can do that through the website, Lee at realmushrooms.com. Shoot me an email. And I think my parting shot, like my 65 years of kind of wisdom distilled into this mushroom category, is start consuming mushrooms regularly and never stop. Like, it's not a fad. It's not something that you just want to do for a little bit of time. You want to do it for the rest of your life. It'd be silly to think that you could do all of your exercise that you need to do in a year in 1 month of that year and then have the rest of the year off. If you want to build your muscles up, you can't go to the gym just once 1 week out of a month. You've got to go every week. So if you want to exercise your mushroom muscles, which mean that you'll live longer, you'll have a healthier lifespan, you'll have less chance of developing dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, you'll have less cardiovascular disease, then start taking mushrooms regularly and don't stop.
I love it. Yeah, I'm 100% on board. I've been a huge proponent of functional mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms for a long time, and so you're completely mirroring that, and I would hammer that home as well. Take your mushrooms
Yeah,
and don't
fantastic.
stop. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, hey, Lee, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I wouldn't be surprised if I see you back on here, and
Yeah,
I would love
well,
to keep in touch with you as well.
thanks very much, Evan. I've really enjoyed it. I hope your listeners, get a lot out of it. There's a lot of gems and pearls in what we talked about today. So I hope you and I together have helped, propel people, into their mushroom journey. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I hope the same. And like I said, I wasn't joking. Like there are going to be legit notes for myself off of this. So no, I'm appreciative for that, Lee. And
Cool.
to all the listeners, just if you found any benefit in this, reach out to either of us and feel free to connect. Yeah, and that's going to do for today. So thank you all very much. Connect to your elements, do everything with good intentions, eat your mushrooms, and thank you very much, Lee.
Thank you, Evan. Bye, everyone.